Thank you so much. And good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to see you all of the faces that appear for the talks. It's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Um, we've been working with several different texts, and I'm not going to read them all. Hopefully what I say will have some relevance, even if you're not familiar with the details of the texts. So this week, this Sesshin, we've been celebrating our inheritance. We've inherited a vast treasury of teachings for those who have practiced as we practice and saw into the nature of how we experience and interpret experience, how it is to be a human being in a vast universe, in a personal universe and an impersonal universe. This Sesshin we've received, we have received through koan study, chanting, and various readings, a number of wisdom texts from the ancients, and practiced diving into also zazen and the ever-present current of wisdom that has no teacher and pervades the whole universe. What we are directly experiencing at this very moment. This is the wisdom that has no teacher. These are the 10,000 things that step forward and liberate us, enlighten us. With no outside, inside, or in between, the world is in constant exchange, constantly evolving through the senses and directly, coming forward and receiving, giving and receding, mutually arriving, with nothing to hold in our hands. Nothing to hold in our hands. Well, at the same time, the teachings say, when practice is cast off, original enlightenment fills our hands. So much of this talk can either clarify matters for us and free us from obstructions, or further confuse us and complicate our minds. As long as we try to understand the words with our thinking minds, we are at risk. And yet, we all do it. There's another koan involving Huineng. Huineng doesn't understand, where a monk asks Huineng if he has the dharma of his teacher. And Huineng says, those who understand the Buddha Dharma have it. And the monastic asks him, do you have it? And Huineng says, no, I do not have it. And the monk is very surprised and he says, well, how come? Huineng says, because I don't understand the Buddha Dharma. This is just a great koan. It's a double take kind of a koan the first time you come across it. Well, all of us want to understand the Buddha Dharma, but we want to more than understand. We want to be real and alive and awake and congruent, truly ourselves. We want to be natural, at ease. We hear a deep calling in these teachings, which somehow resonates clearly with our own direct experience. But on our own, we may not be able to get at it without face-to-face guidance. We may not know which direction to be looking in our own experience. This is a little like cooking. You might taste some beets that somebody serves you that tastes unusually flavorful and not be able to tell why until the cook mentions that she always shakes a little bit of cinnamon into the beets. And suddenly you realize, oh yeah, yes, now I taste that. So we all know when we know where to look we see many things we didn't notice with our habituated mind, which has been narrowed by years of doing something the same way, of holding a fixed opinion and a fixed view of what's going on and who we are. When we discover how attention can expand into stillness, as is possible to do a bit in Sesshin, from the angle of what we directly experience, everything changes. When we directly experience that expanding of perception. The teachings help us hear the sounds of the world. They help us. When they describe our experience in a way that captures our hidden places, our shadows, then we perk up and we can investigate for ourselves. When we receive the guidance we need, how to look. I'm thinking of whenever I think about investigating the self, I remember that terrific movie, I Heart Huckabee. Did anybody here see that movie years ago with Lily Tomlin and I don't know, a whole slew of people? It's a very silly movie about a group of existential investigators. And they are hired to investigate the truth of a certain person's life. That's kind of what we're doing. It's a great Zen movie. It's very funny, and I recommend it. So we wake up from an old habit of listening just to the cultural prescriptions and ideas about what this life is for, and about who we are, and about who we should be. This is what comes along when we begin to expand awareness of our own direct experience. And we need to quiet down and settle down. It's very helpful to do that, which is why we emphasize stillness, emphasize daily practice, bringing the rhythm of returning to stillness into our life, into our habits. And until this happens, until we wake up a bit to our awareness, we may have spent years laboring over appearances and grasping at reflections, and be really quite weary and filled with sarcasm and skepticism. In Dharma, we taste authenticity and want it for ourselves. This cultural world that we are part of is so wrapped up in confusion and deceit. And most of us have had really long lives, and some say many lives, to master and integrate the world's confusion into our self-system. So as long as we are identifying solely with this part of the mind, the thinking mind, the cognitive function, whose job it is to understand, we miss what we most deeply long for. This is the soup that we Zen folks swim in. This is the noodling that koans extrude for us. Have you ever made pasta? One of the ways that you get some of the shapes is by extruding, pushing the pasta dough through these shapes. This is kind of what happens sometimes. That's what it feels like almost during Sesshin. In the middle of Sesshin, we're just getting extruded through the shaper. When Huineng says, I don't understand the Buddha Dharma, he means I don't understand the Buddha Dharma. I live my life directly, wholeheartedly, and whole bodily. He's saying, for me, it's not just a matter of intellectually understanding. And that's what we're all trying to get at, is how to go beyond our intellectual understanding so that it's real in our life. It's real. We hear these words, we know just what they're talking about. They're very practical. They're very straightforward, actually. We do want wisdom. We want to see the way things truly are. And think the way to do this is to understand the teachings with our thinking minds. But in Zen, we're encouraged to inquire, to do our own work, not to follow somebody else's path. That's how koans function. In this tradition, the teachings come to us in a koan form when we use koans, which is rather wabi-sabi in its nature. They point to it from a different angle than we're used to, than the angle of the usual narratives and ways of fabricating the world that we're also settled into and kind of on automatic with. Do you know the term wabi-sabi? Wabi-sabi is it's applied in Japanese aesthetics and based on impermanence and imperfection. Wabi-sabi means you don't go for straight up, you go for at an angle. You go more toward the way natural things arise, which is not in some squared off way. Wabi-sabi. It's a different angle for looking at what we see. And just like we bring to a koan, which is never what it seems, it tricks our habitual understanding. We fall flat on our face and are struck dumb by being unable to figure out what they're talking about in the usual terms. And just like Nanyue couldn't respond to Hui Nang's question when he first got there, when he first met him. So we have to drop our usual way of making sense of the world. To the extent that we can do that, we become more flexible and a little bit more relaxed. And somewhere along the line, somewhere along in a life of practice, we discover freedom. What happens when we happen upon it, it's usually quite by accident. Aitken Roshi often said, Zen practice makes us accident prone. We awaken by accident. Zen practice makes us accident prone. It doesn't cause awakening, as we've been looking into this week. By accident, and each of us by a different route, we come to see how we are actually free and have always been from the very beginning. But we do need to discover this for ourselves. We can only discover it by ourselves. It's the only way. Since it is an inmost revelation, the nature of revelation is inmost. It goes beyond the words, straight to the function, dropping all separation, relaxing out of even a morsel of self-consciousness. When we are at long last free of self-consciousness, which we can't get to by willing. It's not the way it happens, because the will is all about self-assertion. So it's challenging. It's so challenging. When we awaken and we discover our freedom, our innate freedom, we are right away freed from not knowing what gets in our way. We may not be entirely free of it, but we at least see it. And it definitely gets in the way of being who we truly are. When we are free, we are given this new koan. Who am I actually, if I'm truthful, if I'm real? I don't know how that feels. Maybe I was when I was a little kid. I don't know. We are freed of what gets in our way of being who we truly are. And we stop piling stuff on and holding on and relax and live wholly into our circumstances, just the way they are. Something moves aside. The self moves aside. Of course, that doesn't mean that we're free of trouble, because, trouble is the first noble truth. There's always trouble right here in River City. But when we are not clenched by self, we are freer to play with what is coming our way, to be flexible and creative sometimes. Now, this process of transformation that slowly or suddenly is realized liberates our true freedom, liberates us into true freedom to respond. We realize how to function genuinely from our source of truth, to be real. It relieves us of a tremendous burden of trying to measure up in some way that we either have an idea of what it is or we don't. Some people have a specific idea. Some people just can't quite figure out what they're supposed to be doing, but they know they're never doing it. We all work with this. So we start out with a lot of suffering. That's most often what gets us started in practice, most of us. And then the process is underway, even when it doesn't look like much. Sitting, breathing, listening to sound, still getting triggered. Okay. But regular practice has its own pacing and begins, the Tibetans say, that we begin the practice of enlightenment with the first thought of enlightenment. When it occurs to us that there may be, that I could be free, or we see it in someone else and we think, wow, what would that be like to be that relaxed? So when I was putting this together, I thought of that, that I don't know what to call it, but this is what it is. You take a tablespoon of salt and you put it in a glass of water and you get really salty water. But then you take that same tablespoon of salt and you put it in the lake and it has it's nowhere to be found. This is like the spaciousness of the heart mind, when we have a practice and realize continually the openness of our life in any circumstance, in all circumstances, even when we don't know how it could possibly be. Where is the openness in this? Because there are some circumstances that are impossible. It's very hard to see a way through. So we have the usual challenges in life, but something has moved aside. And what was so salty and difficult to swallow early on dissolves in the enormity of the ocean when we have been accepted and used in the practice of enlightenment. The saltiness is no longer an impediment. We can enjoy the salt, the sweet, the sour, the bitter, and the bland tastes, the 5 flavors. Life is simpler with this, released from picking and choosing and avoiding. We live with more simplicity, and as well as faith in our own ability to see the transparency of the glass, to see the transparency of situations, the openness, the possibilities that we might never have noticed before when we were very caught. In the words of Shi Tu, who's the author of the Song of the Grassroots Hermitage that we've been reciting every day, he said, the wide sky does not obstruct the white clouds drifting. Nothing obstructs. One thing does not obstruct another. And that can be really, that can be a koan. What does that mean in any situation? What appears to be an obstruction, in what way is it not an obstruction? What is it not obstructing? This is why this practice is our own, has to be our own, because we all meet different circumstances all the time, constantly. Our life is circumstances. So I wanted to look a little bit more into this song of the grass roofed hermitage, since it has a really different flavor, but actually really similar implications and teachings for us. She too was also a student of Huineng, briefly before Huineng died. And then he became a successor of Huineng's successor, Qingchuan Xingxi. Remember that name? Now I can barely read it, actually. She too was all about simplicity and faith in that comes with living in an open and unimpeded and direct way. Simplicity. He has an affinity with the spaciousness of living very simply. The commentary to the koan we've been studying says, to set up monasteries and establish the teachings is like adding flowers to brocade. You know what brocade is? It's this sumptuous material that has raised patterns in it and is often shot through with either silver or gold threads. It's very fancy. So to set up monasteries and establish the teachings is like adding flowers to brocade. So that's a challenge to us. Both of our groups are establishing places of practice. So it's important to keep in mind what we're actually doing that for, what the essence of the offering is. There's no need to add anything to what is already woven. It's full and complete in the present moment. She too takes this even further in the song. He says, jade palaces or vermilion towers can't compare with it. Can't compare with what? A plain dwelling, living simply. The heart that does not need anything to feel at home. Nothing in the world, no material circumstances can compare with being at peace. Thich Nhat Hanh has said the most important practice is the cultivation of peace in the heart. So she too is talking about a very plain dwelling, and the heart that does not need anything to feel at home, a simple refuge that brings peace, built of lowly grasses, and in it there is nothing of value. There's nothing to cling to. He urges us to let go of attainment and accomplishments and to live simply. A grass hut, I mean, most of us probably haven't encountered a grass hut. In his time and place, that was not terribly unusual, but most of us haven't seen one. But if you think about it, it's easily blown away. It's easily blown away. So a grass hut, you can easily rebuild. All you have to do is bind grasses. I think that's what he says. But any storm or strong wind can blow our house down. The three little piggies show us how that happens. Huh? How long is a grass hut a grass hut? Even without a strong wind. It will disappear when the wind rises. It'll disappear after a couple of seasons of rain and cold and heat. So thus it is extremely adaptable in times of change that are sure to come. And that's what we're doing. This practice allows us to become more and more flexible as we realize the true nature of life. We're already each deeply connected with the whole of nature. There's nothing missing. Though the hut is small, it includes the entire world. The hut is 10 feet square. Now, I don't know if he's referring here to Vimalakirti, but that's what came to my mind when I saw this. The enlightened layperson Vimalakirti, who is a contemporary of Shakyamuni Buddha and wrote a sutra, invited into his 10-foot square sick room many universes of bodhisattvas and demigods and beings of every level of attainment beyond counting. 10-foot square, you're probably all in rooms that are bigger than 10-foot square, if only by a little. Yet, there was space enough for many universes of beings to gather in order to receive the wisdom of the non-dual nature of life. In fact, we receive the truth of the non-dual nature of all of life all the time in company with all beings right now through our life. It's always manifesting the non-dual nature at this very moment. It is a universally available hut. Some can receive it and some cannot. Some can receive this insight, this realization, and some cannot, depending on karma. In that sutra, Vimalakirti says, I am sick because the whole world is sick. How can a deeply enlightened person be sick? How can one richly endowed be poor? How can completely failing at your koan be part of awakening? These are the contradictions that pull and turn us in our lives. But the person who lives here calmly in the hut isn't stuck to inside or outside or in between, to vermilion towers or weedy roofs, not to samsara, not to nirvana, not to good times, not to bad times, not to difficulties and not to celebration. And we can all work with, so not stuck to inside or outside or in between. In between is one I'm going to really work with personally. I love that. Not stuck to in between. So maybe you all want to take that up too. What is this in between? What is in between samsara and nirvana? And we can all work with what is not in between, means accepting some circumstances and rejecting others. No matter what fills our life at any moment, it is open and the nature of change. It's of the nature of change. It is what we have to work with. It's like Zoom. It's like Zoom. It's not like anything, but it's like Zoom. It's what we've got. And it is a great blessing to have Zoom. Without that, we couldn't be looking at each other right now, sharing this remarkable, strange practice that we do. And not to hold fast to some formal kind of idea of practice outside of the ordinary moments of our ordinary life. We practice Zazen, we clean the toilets, we comfort a friend, we give dana to visiting teachers, we build Zen centers, knowing that the actual center is right here in this very moment, no matter where we are. And then there's a line, after eating, I relax and enjoy a nap. This is a lovely example of that. An example of the middle way. Not too much effort, not too little effort. When it is time for Zazen, we sit. When tired, we take a nap. We flex according to circumstances. We respond. And then there's this line, meet the ancestral teachers, be familiar with their instructions. Aitken Roshi used to say that when we truly open to our essential nature, we are eyebrow to eyebrow with the ancestors. That's a really intimate image, isn't it? We are intimate with the ancestors, with experience in the same way as Dogen, Bodhidharma, Lingzhao, Nanyue. We're intimate. No separation, right here and now, all together, coming forward with all beings simultaneously. And then open your hands and walk innocent. How long has it been since you experienced innocence? What is the heart of innocence? Goodness, openness, honesty, guilelessness, truthfulness, not putting on any airs. In the world that is dominated by a spirit of greed and hostility and self-centeredness, we can let down our guard. Can we let down our guard enough to trust in a moment and allow the heart to open, unclench, and let go of hundreds of years? Can we find release, letting go of hundreds of years, finding release from the trauma that we experienced, perhaps, that our parents experienced, that our grandparents experienced, that the whole culture and all the communities that we're part of, all the way back in time. Trauma leaves a legacy that denies us access to innocence. And yet, he raises this as a possibility. It is a word, it is something described that clearly comes from his own experience. When we turn the light to shine within, do we trust ourselves? When we turn the light to shine within, we bring that much more light into the world. What is that light in your experience? And then he finishes with a terrific image, which is hard to forget and helpful to practice with. Don't separate from this skin bag here and now. I love that, the skin bag. It's something we can use in body scans. We can check into the skin bag. What's inside, what's outside, what's in between. So I've just referred to a few of the lines in this wonderful Song of the Grassroots Hermitage. I encourage everybody to really become familiar with it. It's so rich, every line, as well as the term hermitage. Hermitage, in a way, in Zazen, when we enter Zazen, we enter our hermitage. We all enter the solitude of this work and seek refuge that frees us to be truly intimate with all of our companions in this life, when we can be truly intimate with our own inmost experience, our genuine selves. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mushin, for the beautiful talk. So wonderful to share this space with you all. For those who are joining us just for this evening, please feel free to proceed to Zazen in your own homes or enjoy Friday evening in another way, perhaps. And for the rest of us, we'll continue with zazen offline and return for a closing evening chant at 10 to 9.
Do you want to say something about tomorrow night?
Yes, I do. For those who are joining us just tonight, tomorrow evening we're going to have our final Dharma talk, and then it's going to be followed by Fusatsu, our full moon ceremony. And so everyone's welcome to stay for that. You can come to the talk and go, or stay for the ceremony, which will take about a half an hour. Wonderful way to celebrate the moon and the culmination of retreat and the renewal of our vows. So please.
And ordinarily we have a full moon metta ceremony at the full moon, but because we're doing that here in Sesshin, it will be suspended just for this month.
Thank you all.